Ever wonder why some of the most ambitious films of the 1960s crashed at the box office, only to become cult legends decades later? These weren't just flops, they were bold experiments, studio disasters, and visionary projects that audiences weren't ready for. From Western epics that were chopped to pieces, to surreal dramas that bewildered viewers, some of these films nearly destroyed the studios that made them, yet their artistry refused to fade. Today, we're diving into the top 15 underrated 1960s flops, uncovering the stories behind the failures, the behind-the-scenes chaos, and the hidden brilliance that's kept cinephiles obsessed. Buckle up. Some of these tales are as dramatic off-screen as they are on. Major Dundee, 1965. Some films don't just tell a story, they make Hollywood hold its breath and then wonder what just happened. That's Sam Peckinpah's Major Dundee, a Western epic that promised grandeur, grit, and moral complexity, and delivered chaos, controversy, and studio nightmares. The story follows Colonel Dundee, Charlton Heston, a Union officer tasked with leading a ragtag regiment across the Mexican desert to capture a band of Apaches. Alongside him rides a motley crew, Confederate soldiers, misfits, and prisoners, all forced into a reluctant alliance. On the surface, it's a chase movie, but Peckinpah layers it with ethical dilemmas, simmering tensions, and the brutal realities of war and human obsession. Every shot is meant to test the line between honor and obsession, courage and hubris. Did you know the production itself was as wild as the story? Columbia Pictures kept slashing the budget while Peckinpah expanded his vision. Stars like Richard Harris and Charlton Heston clashed with the director over pacing, dialogue, and direction. Peckinpah's perfectionism led to endless takes under the scorching desert sun, pushing cast and crew to their limits. By the end, the studio cut over 40 minutes from the film, releasing a version that barely resembled the director's vision. Critics panned it, calling it bloated, confusing, and a financial disaster. Yet time has been kinder. Modern critics now hail Major Dundee as a flawed masterpiece, a Western that dared to tackle moral ambiguity, flawed heroism, and the chaos of command in ways few films dared. Peckinpah's meticulous framing, the tension between Heston's rigid authority and Harris's impulsive energy, and the sun-scorched cinematography create a visual and emotional intensity that lingers. Major Dundee is more than a flop. It's a cautionary tale of studio interference, a testament to ambition, and a glimpse at what Hollywood could achieve when vision collides with reality. The film that nearly derailed Peckinpah's career now stands as a touchstone for cinephiles who crave bold, morally complex storytelling. In the end, Major Dundee proves that sometimes a movie's true greatness isn't recognized at release. It's discovered decades later in the desert heat of memory and cinematic legend. The Train, 1964. Some films aren't just about war. They're a high-stakes ballet of steel, courage, and obsession. That's John Frankenheimer's The Train, a tense World War II thriller that plunges you into occupied France, where every second counts. Every decision carries life or death weight, and the line between heroism and futility blurs. The story follows Paul Labiche, Burt Lancaster, a French resistance fighter, and Major von Waldheim, Paul Schofield, a meticulous Nazi officer obsessed with transporting priceless art to Germany before the Allies arrive. What seems like a simple mission, stop a train from leaving the station, escalates into a nerve-wracking cat-and-mouse game, blending strategy, courage, and desperation. Frankenheimer crafts a story where intellect battles brute force, and every corridor, tunnel, and rail yard become a stage for tension, ingenuity, and moral complexity. Did you know that Frankenheimer insisted on using real trains and authentic locations in France? The production involved massive coordination with railway authorities, stunt crews, and hundreds of extras, all while maintaining jaw-dropping realism. The climactic train sequences were filmed with such precision that the audience feels every screeching turn, exploding car, and daring maneuver. Lancaster's performance is magnetic, blending determination, wit, and subtle vulnerability, while Schofield's icy discipline raises the stakes at every turn. Critics praise The Train for its meticulous pacing and moral depth. Unlike many war films of the era, it isn't about grandiose heroics. It's about cleverness under pressure, sacrifice, and the tension of knowing that a single misstep can cost everything. The film also examines the ethical dilemmas of preserving culture amid chaos, art versus lives, duty versus humanity. Frankenheimer's direction, with its tight framing, moving camera work, and masterful editing, immerses viewers directly into the heart of the action, making you feel like you're crouched beside the tracks, holding your breath. The Train isn't just a war thriller, it's a suspenseful meditation on obsession, courage, and the human cost of protecting what's priceless. Even decades later, it remains a blueprint for tension, strategy, and cinematic craftsmanship in wartime storytelling. The Secret War of Harry Frig, 1968. Some films don't just flirt with history, they twist it into a cheeky, chaotic adventure that makes you question who's really in charge. That's The Secret War of Harry Frig, a World War II comedy that proves even the deadliest of wars can have a mischievous side, if you know where to look. Paul Newman stars as Harry Frig, a charismatic, rule-breaking private who somehow always lands in trouble and somehow always escapes it. When he's unexpectedly promoted to colonel and tasked with liberating a group of eccentric Allied generals held in an Italian castle, chaos ensues. Frigg's unorthodox tactics clash spectacularly with rigid military protocol, turning every operation into a comedic chess match of ingenuity, luck, and sheer audacity. Did you know the film was shot on location in Italy, with real castles, courtyards, and cobblestone streets, giving the comedy an authentic, almost tangible texture? Newman's charm carries every scene, but the supporting cast, including veteran actors who had survived Hollywood's golden age, adds layers of wit, timing, and subtle commentary on authority and obedience. Director Brian G. Hutton balances slapstick with satire, showing that even amid global conflict, human folly and cleverness persist. Despite its star power and inventive premise, The Secret War of Harry Frig was overshadowed at the box office by more serious war films and flashy epics of the late 1960s. Critics were divided. Some dismissed it as lightweight, while others praised its audacity, humor, and Newman's magnetic performance. Over time, cinephiles began to appreciate its clever subversion of wartime tropes and its sly critique of military hierarchy. What makes The Secret War of Harry Frig enduring isn't just the laughs. It's how the film highlights human creativity under pressure, the absurdity of rigid rules, and the charm of a rogue who bends the system without breaking it. The castle, the cannon fodder, and the calculated chaos combine to create a wartime story that entertains and surprises. In the end, this underrated 1960s flop reminds us that not every war story needs to be grim to be compelling. Sometimes, the greatest victories come from wit, audacity, and the ability to turn the rules upside down. The Swimmer, 1968. Some films don't just tell a story. They sneak into your subconscious and refuse to leave. That's Frank Perry's The Swimmer, a surreal, haunting journey through the sun-soaked suburbs of America that almost sank the studio that made it. Burt Lancaster stars as Ned Merrill, a man who decides, on a whim, to swim home through every backyard pool in his neighborhood. At first, it feels whimsical, even playful, but with every lap, the world shifts. Pools turn into mirrors, reflecting loss, illusion, and the slow unraveling of a life. Did you know this film nearly destroyed Warner Brothers? Lancaster and Perry clashed with executives over tone, pacing, and the unconventional narrative. Reshoots, editing battles, and marketing confusion left the studio frustrated. The public wasn't ready for a movie that was more psychological exploration than conventional drama. Upon release, it flopped, but the vision behind it couldn't be buried. Lancaster's performance is hypnotic. He carries a charm and vulnerability that draws viewers into Ned's unraveling world, balancing charisma with a creeping sense of despair. Each encounter in the pools reveals a fragment of his life. Friendships strained, illusions shattered, and a moral reckoning slowly unfolding. Supporting performances, from Janice Rule to Judith Anderson, deepen the emotional resonance, giving weight to every interaction, every look, every pause. What makes The Swimmer unforgettable isn't just the story, it's the atmosphere. Perry's direction, combined with the cinematography, transforms familiar suburban spaces into surreal, almost dreamlike landscapes. Time seems to stretch and contract, mirroring Ned's psychological state. Every shot, every sun-drenched reflection becomes a meditation on denial, identity, and the human desire to escape reality. Today, The Swimmer is celebrated as a cult masterpiece, a bold, audacious work that defied genre, narrative expectation, and studio sensibilities. The very film that almost sank Warner Brothers now floats effortlessly in cinematic legend, reminding us that true artistry often comes with risk, rebellion, and the courage to swim against the current. The Secret Life of an American Wife, 1968. Some films don't just fail at the box office. They become cautionary tales about ambition, tone, and timing in Hollywood. That's George Axelrod's The Secret Life of an American Wife, a 1968 dramedy that tried to mix satire, social commentary, and romance, but ended up as one of the decade's most spectacular flops. The story follows Joanne Woodward as a suburban housewife who dreams of excitement beyond her routine life. When a famous movie star, played by Walter Matthau, enters her world, a chain of misadventures unfolds. Axelrod intended a sharp, witty exploration of suburban monotony and suppressed desire, but studio interference, conflicting tones, and uneven pacing left audiences confused and critics divided. What was meant to be a sophisticated comedy of manners felt inconsistent, awkward, and ultimately forgettable to many moviegoers. Did you know the production was plagued with last-minute reshoots and studio demands for a lighter, more comedic approach? Paramount executives constantly clashed with Axelrod over dialogue, narrative focus, and character motivations, leaving the final product disjointed. Despite the star power of Woodward and Matthau, audiences struggled to connect with the film, and it quickly vanished from theaters. Yet the film isn't without merit. Woodward delivers a nuanced, understated performance, balancing charm, frustration, and yearning, while Mathau's sly, sardonic presence adds spark to the otherwise uneven narrative. Cinematographer Joseph F. Bierach frames the suburban setting with a glossy, ironic elegance, turning ordinary spaces into arenas of tension, humor, and personal revelation. The Secret Life of an American Wife may have flopped, but it remains a fascinating artifact of 1960s Hollywood, a glimpse into the era's ambitions, limitations, and the delicate dance between satire and sentiment. The film reminds us that even in failure, there's artistry, intent, and lessons for filmmakers and cinephiles alike. In the end, this flop proves that sometimes the most interesting stories come from projects that stumble, films that dared to experiment, clash with studio expectations, and offer a peek behind Hollywood's glossy curtain, even if audiences weren't ready to follow. The Picasso Summer, 1969. Some films don't just drift into theaters, they disappear, leaving behind whispers of ambition that audiences weren't ready to embrace. That's Robert Salan's The Picasso Summer, a 1969 drama that paired Albert Finney and Yvette Mimieux in a story about obsession, art, and longing, yet flopped spectacularly at the box office despite its lush visuals and star power. The story follows Harry, Finney, an American man obsessed with meeting Pablo Picasso, traveling across France with his companion in search of adventure, inspiration, and a brush with genius. On paper, it's a poetic, whimsical journey into the heart of creativity. On screen, however, the narrative meanders. Studios and audiences struggled with the film's tone. Part romance, part philosophical meditation, it didn't fit neatly into any category, leaving it misunderstood and overlooked. Did you know the film was shot on location in Paris and the south of France to capture authentic European charm? From sunlit streets to Picasso studios, every frame is a painterly composition. Yet, as beautiful as it is, the story's pacing and subtlety alienated mainstream viewers, cementing its reputation as a commercial failure. Critics were divided. Some praised Finney's magnetic performance, which balanced obsession, charm, and vulnerability, and admired the film's introspective take on art and human longing. Others dismissed it as slow, pretentious, or lacking dramatic tension. Despite the flop, cinephiles today recognize The Picasso Summer as a quietly ambitious, overlooked gem, a film that dares to explore the inner landscapes of desire, creativity, and personal transformation. The film's failure wasn't due to lack of talent. Salan's direction, combined with atmospheric cinematography, creates a contemplative, dreamlike mood that lingers long after the credits roll. It's a cinematic meditation rather than a conventional narrative, a quality that may have doomed it commercially, but ultimately makes it fascinating to rediscover. In the end, The Picasso Summer proves that not all flops are forgettable. Some films are too subtle, too unconventional, or too ahead of their time, And that very ambition can make them the hidden treasures of cinema history, waiting for audiences willing to look beneath the surface. Ski Troop Attack, 1960. Some films don't just fizzle, they crash and skid off the radar, leaving only curious whispers among cinephiles. That's Ski Troop Attack, a 1960 Korean war drama that tried to combine action, suspense, and outdoor spectacle, but ended up a commercial flop that barely left footprints in Hollywood history. The story follows a squad of U.S. soldiers navigating treacherous, snow-covered terrain behind enemy lines, facing both the harsh winter and relentless adversaries. The premise promised tension, camaraderie, and a unique angle on war movies of the era. Soldiers battling not only foes but nature itself. Unfortunately, the execution left much to be desired. Low budgets, awkward pacing, and limited production values meant the thrilling concept rarely translated to the screen. Did you know much of the film was shot in studio-bound snow sets rather than real mountains? The artificiality of the landscapes, combined with stilted dialogue and wooden performances, made it difficult for audiences to immerse themselves in the danger the soldiers supposedly faced. The ambitious action sequences often fell flat, undercutting the story's tension and leaving viewers unconvinced. Critics were merciless. While some appreciated the attempt at a winter war survival story, most dismissed the film as derivative, low-budget, and lacking in character depth. Ski Troop Attack failed to make any significant mark at the box office, quickly disappearing into the shadows of more polished war films of the 1960s. Yet, the film isn't without its curiosities. For enthusiasts of obscure war cinema, it offers a glimpse into Hollywood's experimentation with genre, setting, and narrative scope during a time of studio experimentation. Director Roger Corman, protege Edward L. Kahn, uncredited, tried to capture tension in constrained circumstances, and the film's survivalist angle would later find echoes in more successful war and action films. In the end, Ski Troop Attack proves that not all flops are devoid of interest. Sometimes the failed experiments, the awkward pacing, and the ambitions that overshoot their target become fascinating windows into Hollywood's trial and error process. Films that may have stumbled commercially but remain curious artifacts for those willing to discover them. Frozen Alive, 1964. Some films don't just disappear, they vanish into obscurity, leaving only a few curious whispers behind. That's Frozen Alive, a 1964 horror sci-fi that tried to shock and thrill audiences with its icy premise, but instead slid into commercial failure, becoming one of the decade's overlooked curiosities. The story follows a scientist experimenting with suspended animation, freezing human subjects in a bid to conquer death itself. When things go horribly wrong, chaos ensues, and the narrative plunges into a blend of suspense, horror, and moral caution. On paper, it's a gripping premise, a chilling exploration of ambition, science, and human curiosity. On screen, however, the execution faltered. Budget limitations, awkward pacing, and cheesy special effects left audiences unshaken rather than terrified. Did you know the film relied heavily on practical effects that were impressive for its time, but often looked unintentionally comical? The frozen corpses, dramatic lab setups, and tense confrontations were meant to thrill, yet the low production value made suspension of disbelief difficult for many viewers. Add in wooden performances and stilted dialogue, and the ambitious premise couldn't quite land. Critics were unforgiving. While some appreciated the attempt at atmospheric horror and the underlying moral questions about science versus ethics, most dismissed the film as derivative and poorly executed. At the box office, it barely made a ripple, quickly overshadowed by more polished horror and sci-fi entries of the 1960s. Yet Frozen Alive holds a peculiar charm. For fans of cult cinema, it's a glimpse into the era's experimentation with science fiction and horror, an artifact of a time when filmmakers pushed boundaries with limited resources. The story's ambition, combined with the icy, claustrophobic setting, gives it a certain eerie allure, even if the scares don't quite land. In the end, Frozen Alive proves that flops can still fascinate. Sometimes it's the failed experiments, the creative risks, and the strange ideas that survive beyond their time, offering a peek into Hollywood's bold, if flawed, imagination. It's a frozen curiosity, waiting for the brave or the curious to rediscover its icy tale. The Appointment, 1969. Some films don't just fail. They vanish quietly, leaving only murmurs of what could have been. That's The Appointment, a 1969 psychological drama starring Omar Sharif and Anouk Aimée. a film that promised intrigue, romance, and tension, yet flopped spectacularly, becoming one of the decade's most overlooked cinematic experiments. The story follows Sharif as a wealthy, emotionally troubled man entangled in a dangerous web of obsession, power, and desire, while Aimee portrays his enigmatic love interest, whose motives are as mysterious as they are captivating. On paper, it's a tense, character-driven exploration of psychology and control. On screen, however, the pacing struggles, the narrative feels uneven, and the film's darker undertones alienated mainstream audiences, leaving it lost amid the more conventional thrillers of the era. Did you know the film was helmed by Sidney Lumet's contemporary filmmaker Sidney Pollack, uncredited influence, who attempted to blend suspense, European sophistication, and psychological drama? The production featured lush European locations and moody cinematography meant to heighten tension, but studio interference and inconsistent editing diluted the impact, leaving audiences more puzzled than riveted. Critics were mixed. While Sharif's brooding, magnetic presence and Aimee's ethereal performance earned praise, the story's ambiguity and slow-burning tension frustrated viewers expecting conventional thrills or romance. At the box office, The Appointment barely made an impression, overshadowed by flashier, more accessible films of the late 1960s. Yet, the film retains a unique allure for cinephiles. Its exploration of obsession, manipulation, and human vulnerability stands out as an ambitious attempt at psychological storytelling in an era dominated by spectacle and straightforward narratives. The atmospheric visuals and intense performances hint at a film that could have been celebrated under different circumstances. In the end, The Appointment proves that flops aren't always failures of talent or vision. Sometimes they are misunderstood experiments, quietly waiting for rediscovery. Beneath its uneven surface lies a story of desire, control, and tension, a hidden gem for those willing to look beyond the box office numbers. A Fool's World, 1969. Some films don't just stumble, they vanish, leaving only whispers in the corridors of cinema history. That's A Fool's World, a 1969 drama that aimed to blend comedy, social satire, and human folly, yet flopped spectacularly, barely registering with audiences or critics at the time. The story follows a hapless everyman navigating the absurdities of modern life, caught between personal ambition, romantic misadventures, and society's expectations. What should have been a sharp, witty reflection on human foibles instead felt uneven, with pacing issues, inconsistent tone, and performances that struggled to land the humor and poignancy the script demanded. Audiences expecting a clever comedy found themselves adrift in a narrative that never quite coalesced. Did you know that the film attempted an experimental approach to storytelling, with unconventional scene transitions, overlapping dialogue, and fragmented timelines meant to reflect the chaos of the protagonist's life? While ambitious, these techniques confused viewers more than they entertained, contributing to its commercial failure. The production also suffered from budget constraints, limiting set design and visual flair, both critical elements for a film relying heavily on atmosphere and character. Critics were unimpressed. While some noted the film's occasional flashes of clever observation and praised the lead actor's charm, most dismissed it as muddled, pretentious, or unfunny. It quickly disappeared from theaters, overshadowed by more polished comedies and dramas of the late 1960s. Yet for modern cinephiles, A Fool's World holds a quiet fascination. Its experimental ambitions, subtle commentary on human absurdity, and occasional moments of brilliance hint at a film that could have been a cult classic under different circumstances. It's a reminder that commercial flop does not always equal artistic failure. Sometimes, a film simply exists ahead of its time, waiting for the right audience to uncover its hidden layers. In the end, A Fool's World proves that flops can be treasures in disguise. Beneath its uneven surface lies a witty, reflective, and occasionally brilliant tale of human folly, a film that dared to experiment, even if the world wasn't ready to follow. Charlie, 1968. Some films don't just tell a story. They probe the mind itself, asking questions about intelligence, humanity, and the price of transformation. That's Ralph Nelson's Charlie, a drama that turned Cliff Robertson into an Academy Award winner, yet nearly derailed expectations at the box office. Based on Daniel Keyes' novel Flowers for Algernon, the film explores the life of Charlie Gordon, a man with a developmental disability who undergoes a groundbreaking procedure that dramatically increases his intelligence, but at a profound emotional cost. From the first scenes, Robertson's performance captivates. He embodies innocence, curiosity, and vulnerability with a natural charm, pulling audiences into Charlie's world of simplicity, wonder, and gradual awakening. As his IQ skyrockets, the film transitions from tender comedy to psychological drama, exploring the isolation and moral complexities that accompany brilliance. Every smile, glance, and falter feel meticulously crafted, prompting viewers to question the true meaning of intelligence and the human need for connection. Did you know that the production faced significant challenges? Balancing sensitivity with drama, Nelson had to navigate studio concerns over controversial themes and pacing. The filmmakers also innovated with visual techniques to represent Charlie's evolving mental state. Subtle camera shifts, lighting changes, and editing rhythms mirror the character's internal growth and subsequent decline. The result is a narrative that is as much felt as it is seen. Critics were divided. Robertson's performance received universal acclaim, but some audiences struggled with the film's somber shifts and introspective tone. Over time, however, Charlie has earned recognition as a thoughtful and daring exploration of human potential and vulnerability, tackling themes that Hollywood rarely approached in the 1960s: the ethics of science, emotional intelligence, and the fragility of progress. Charlie isn't merely a drama, it's a meditation on brilliance and the human heart. The story challenges viewers to consider the cost of knowledge, the meaning of empathy, and the ultimate value of a life fully felt. In the end, this underrated 1960s film proves that sometimes the most compelling stories aren't about action or spectacle. They're about the delicate, fragile inner worlds of those who dare to change, and the truths they reveal about all of us. The Wild Bunch, 1969. Some films don't just tell a story, they explode onto the screen, leaving a trail of grit, blood, and unforgettable moral ambiguity. That's Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, a Western unlike anything audiences had seen before. This wasn't the romanticized frontier of old Hollywood. This was raw, violent, and morally complex, a portrait of men clinging to honor in a world that's moving past them. The story follows Dutch, William Holden, and his gang of aging outlaws on one last heist along the U.S.-Mexico border, pursued by relentless lawmen, betrayal, and the unstoppable march of modernity. Peckinpah didn't just want to make a Western. He wanted to challenge the genre itself. Each shootout, each confrontation is choreographed like a deadly dance, where loyalty, survival, and ethics collide in a haze of gunpowder and dust. Did you know that Peckinpah pioneered the use of slow motion to portray violence in a way that was both beautiful and horrifying? The film's infamous shootouts were filmed with dozens of cameras, capturing bullets, dust, and debris in balletic sequences that stunned audiences and terrified studio executives. It was a gamble that nearly got the project killed before release. Critics and viewers were shocked. Some praised its audacity, others condemned its explicit depiction of violence. Yet beneath the blood and gunfire lies a meditation on aging, loyalty, and the cost of living by a code in a world that no longer values it. Actors like Ernest Borgnine and Robert Ryan added gravitas, portraying men caught between fading ideals and brutal reality. The Wild Bunch isn't just a Western, it's a cinematic reckoning. Peckinpah's direction combines sweeping landscapes, intimate character moments, and choreographed chaos to create a story where every choice matters and every bullet counts. The film changed the way Hollywood approached action, violence, and the Western genre itself. In the end, The Wild Bunch reminds us that some legends aren't gentle and some stories don't fade with time. They explode, leaving a permanent mark on cinema, morality, and the way we see heroism in a world that refuses to stay still. The Sand Pebbles, 1966. Some films don't just tell a story. They pull you into a world so vivid, you can feel the heat of the sun on the Yangtze, hear the creak of the gunboats, and taste the tension in the air. That's Robert Wise's The Sand Pebbles, a sweeping epic starring Steve McQueen, a man whose charisma carries both the narrative and the moral weight of the film. McQueen plays Jake Holman, a machinist aboard a U.S. gunboat patrolling politically unstable China in 1926. On the surface, it's a military adventure, but underneath lies a meditation on loyalty, honor, and moral ambiguity. Holman's personal code clashes with authority, tradition, and the chaos surrounding him, turning every mission into a question of conscience versus duty. Did you know the production spared no effort in realism? Full-scale gunboats were built, the crew trained in authentic naval operations, and hundreds of Chinese extras added cultural texture. McQueen immersed himself in the role, learning to operate the machinery himself, a commitment that added authenticity and grit to every frame. Director Robert Wise combined sweeping visuals with intimate moments of tension, making the Yangtze both a playground and a battlefield. Despite critical praise, the film initially struggled at the box office. Audiences were unprepared for a war story that emphasized moral complexity over spectacle. Yet McQueen's layered performance, paired with Richard Crenna's quiet intensity and Candice Bergen's nuanced moral presence, created a narrative that lingered long after the credits. The film interrogates the human cost of duty, the consequences of neutrality, and the tension between personal ethics and institutional demands, themes rarely explored in Hollywood epics of the era. The Sand Pebbles isn't just a historical war film, it's a masterclass in character, tension, and cinematic craftsmanship. Every river maneuver, every battle sequence, and every interpersonal conflict immerses viewers in both the grandeur and danger of the setting. Decades later, the film stands as proof that commercial disappointment doesn't erase artistry, and that true cinema can be as morally compelling as it is visually breathtaking. 55 Days at Peking, 1963. Some movies aim for immortality and end up in ruin. 55 Days at Peking wasn't just a film, it was an empire built on sand. Directed by Nicholas Ray and starring Charlton Heston, Ava Gardner, and David Niven, this sweeping historical epic set during the Boxer Rebellion promised glory, grandeur, and golden statues. What it delivered instead was one of the most catastrophic financial collapses in Hollywood history. From the start, the production was chaos disguised as ambition. The Spanish sets were massive, entire city blocks rebuilt, thousands of extras dressed in period uniforms, cannons roaring, walls exploding, everything larger than life. But bigger doesn't always mean better. Director Nicholas Ray, the same genius behind Rebel Without a Cause, couldn't keep up with the pressure. Midway through filming, he simply walked off the set. The dream had turned into a cinematic nightmare. Replacement directors scrambled to piece together Ray's vision, but the damage was already done. The film's budget ballooned to over $17 million, an astronomical sum in 1963. The result? A critical shrug and a commercial disaster. Audiences were dazzled but detached. Reviewers called it beautifully empty, grand but hollow. And the real casualty? Samuel Bronston Productions, the studio behind the film, collapsed under the financial weight. Just a year later, after the equally doomed The Fall of the Roman Empire, the once powerful studio shuttered its doors for good. But here's the twist. Time has been kind to 55 Days at Peking. Modern film historians see it not as a failure, but as a relic of a fearless era, when filmmakers gambled everything on vision, not market trends. The costumes, the sets, the scale. It's all breathtaking. A glorious monument to excess. 55 Days at Peking didn't just tell history. It became it. Proof that in Hollywood, the line between triumph and tragedy is only as wide as the frame of a camera. So, what do all these flops have in common? Vision. Raw, reckless, untamed vision. The 1960s weren't just about peace signs and pop songs. They were about filmmakers who swung for the stars and sometimes crashed through the stratosphere. These weren't safe movies. They were cinematic daredevils, defying logic, budget, and sometimes gravity itself. Studios fell, careers crumbled, and legends were born in the rubble. Because in Hollywood, failure isn't the opposite of greatness. It's often the price of it. So tell me, which of these cinematic disasters do you think deserves a second chance? Drop your thoughts below, and if you love hidden Hollywood legends, hit that like, comment, and subscribe. And join me for the next reel of forgotten glory.